Good evening and welcome to the Kuhn Academy for this installment of AP U.S. History. We're here today. We're going to talk about some social unrest on the home fronts during the Civil War, particularly 1863. All right. Most notable event is what's known as the New York Draft Riots. This occurs in the summer of 1863, shortly after the Battle of Gettysburg, which is your main turning point of the Civil War, militarily speaking. What happens is the Congress passes a Conscription Act in 1863. Conscription is a fancy word for draft, and a lovely wall for the word wall that I'd love to see on there for some extra points that I will give you on Thursday's discussion if you're the first one in Thursday morning. So the Conscription Act is basically going to try and solve the North's lack of manpower. Now, the North had a huge advantage in manpower, but they still felt that they were not getting enough soldiers to enlist and join the cause. So they put out a call for states to provide more soldiers, and if they could not get volunteers, then to have a draft. Okay, so this was kind of forced onto the states. It wasn't a national draft like we had during Vietnam. Basically, if you did not want to be drafted, you could pay a $300 fee or hire a substitute. All right, now with $300, to you that's a lot of money. Back then, the soldier in the war was making $13 a month. Okay, so that we're talking $150 a year is what these people are making as soldiers. You got to come up with twice a yearly salary just to get somebody to go fight in your place. Okay, if you could find a substitute for cheaper, you could do that too. But that was basically a way for rich people to get out of the war. Okay, blacks were exempt from the draft for obvious reasons, because if you go to an African American and say, "Oh, you have to fight in the war against your will," we're kind of reinstituting slavery if you think of it that way. Okay, the South had a draft also, and they didn't have the notable riot like this one, but they also had an exemption. They would let you out if you had 20 slaves. So if there were 20 or more slaves on your plantation, you were deemed as a essential asset for the Confederacy, and you were exempt from the draft that way. So there were ways to get out of both drafts, essentially, if you had money. Okay, so the riot starts, and these mostly New York Irish immigrants were targeting the rich, the Republicans, the blacks, the abolitionists. They were upset that they were being forced to fight a war that was going to free slaves. All right, remember this is after the Emancipation Proclamation. Okay, big worry was these African Americans would be freed and then come up north and take their jobs and almost replace them on the social class ladder. So this was kind of who they were going after in the riots. Okay, most of your participants were young Irish Catholics who kind of felt outcast anyways, that they were looked down upon, discriminated against, and didn't want to then fight in an army that was discriminating against their religion and the fact that they were Irish immigrants. Okay, some notable people. These are not draft rioters, but these were people that got out of the draft either through substitutes or found other ways out. And you might know some of their names. Andrew Carnegie, very famous steel magnate, we'll talk about next term. Grover Cleveland became president. J.P. Morgan, a very wealthy banker, and Mr. Roosevelt, not meaning Teddy, but Teddy's father. So people became presidents, and big businessmen did not participate. And if you read the book Outliers in English, you probably read that next year. They talk about all these wealthy industrialists came of age just after the age of being involved in the Civil War, where they were able to just happen to be in the right place at the right time to make their fortunes. All right, so the riots basically tear apart New York City. Okay, and the police are called out, and it eventually is quelled after a couple days when the soldiers are called in by the mayor and the governor of New York to put down the riots and basically kill some people. So on Moodle, I'm going to put a YouTube clip from the movie Gangs of New York, which is a great movie to watch if you're interested, about kind of politics of the time period and immigration and the urban slums and things like that. But this is about a 3-minute scene on YouTube that's really good to kind of illustrate how the draft riots worked and went. And pay particular attention to the narration that you're going to see. Now, down in the South, okay, we had riots also called the Richmond Bread Riots. Richmond, notable because it is the capital of the Confederacy. Okay, this is April 2nd, 1863, so that same year, that's kind of our turning point. And this was a movement of working class women that were protesting the high prices in Richmond, okay, or all throughout the Confederacy. Because as you hopefully learned today, the Confederacy used paper money to supplement their currency because they didn't have gold, and they they just kept printing and printing money to the point where it became worthless. So bread is basically costing upwards of $1,000 a loaf, which you couldn't have come up with. So there's no way for these middle and working class people to eat. So the women took to the streets and rioted. They called for bread and blood. They broke into stores, took bacon, bread, and flour. So they could feed themselves because the prices were too high, and obviously the businessmen that were selling these were taking advantage of the high prices, what we call price gouging, and they kind of took matters into their own hands. Okay, why this is significant is this really transforms the role of your typical Southern woman. Okay, the typical Southern woman, and you'll probably hear me talk about this a couple more times this week, was portrayed in Hollywood as Scarlett O'Hara, all right, by a lovely actress named Vivian Leigh. You might be familiar with somebody with that same name. And that was your Southern woman who was just this pristine, perfect woman, well-dressed, okay, and kind of trophy wife kind of thing, and paraded out to be just very ladylike and very prim and proper. And now this shows the Southern women, have some anger. They have some political feelings, okay, and that they can take action and take matters into their own hands. So this was an attempt to get the government to provide more assistance economically for them. All right. So what we're going to do in class on Thursday, and you have read secondary sources. We've done a lot of primary source work. We're going to read from two very noted historians, and we're going to hopefully identify the causes of the New York draft riots and Richmond bread riots. We'll definitely need to know that. We want to analyze the effects of each of these on their respective home fronts. So how did they change the policies of the government? Okay, and we're going to compare and contrast them. So in our discussion, we're going to try and have different people bringing different perspectives of that, and we want to try and make some connections between these two events in the Civil War and other historical events we have learned about, or maybe even will learn about down the road. Okay, so thank you very much for listening tonight. All right, remember at the Kuhn Academy, we're not just learning history, we're making history. Have a great evening. We'll see you on Thursday for the discussion.